Bon matin tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. I must admit, I'm a bit rattled today. I left my house, I was telling Vicki, at 5 a.m., and I left without my phone. And I feel like I was already at the train station, couldn't miss the train, and so there may be some withdrawal moments as I go through this speech. Alors, je suis vraiment heureuse d'être avec vous aujourd'hui. Je pense que vous avez eu l'occasion d'entendre mon ministre Mark Miller hier, puis mon collègue Benoît Dagenet.
And I'm really happy to be with you today. And I would like to start by saying that we are gathering on the traditional territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. And this is a gathering place for many First Nations, the Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe.
The presentation that I'm giving you today is really around the future of the immigration system. And it's a topic that my department has devoted significant time to over the last year. As noted, I joined the department in June of 2022 at a time, or July of 2022, at a time where there was a lot of conversations around backlogs and processing and post-COVID challenges. There was also a lot of conversations around the pressures in the system with responses to Syria, to Afghanistan, to Ukraine. And so when I arrived in the department, the Prime Minister asked Minister Fraser and I to kind of look at the immigration system and think about what is it that we need to do to have sort of an immigration system of the future. And so I'm very glad to be talking to you about that today. So we did release what is sort of our consensus of what we heard and some of the early actions that the department will take as a result of these conversations that we had across the country. And I thank many of you who participated and gave us some frank advice. We had sessions across the country. We had specific sessions that looked at topics of concern, whether it was around housing or social cohesion or the future of the settlement network, the impacts on settlement service organizations as a result of consequences of major responses by the country, immigration responses by the country. And so those of you who did take part, thank you for your ideas. And we approached the review kind of keenly aware that we needed to take sort of a whole of government approach, a whole of society approach, frankly, to immigration, and wanted to open up the lines of communications. And I have to say that I was struck by the amount of times that I would meet either, an academic or a business leader or a leader in a settlement organization who would say, it's really hard to connect with people in your department. You have to open up your lines of communications to have a little bit more dialogue and exchange. And I think the department does an amazing job at so many things that we do, but I did feel that that was a gap that we needed to commit to not only having this conversation in the context of the review, but actually committing to having ongoing dialogue with partners. So the issues you're discussing here at the conference, the work that you all do have an impact, obviously, on the future of the immigration system. And I think by collaborating, we will get to results. And I am excited to hear about the results of the conversations that you're having and the questions that you may have for me, because I think the solutions really get to collaboration, innovation, and kind of how we can work together to really improve the experience of newcomers. Alors, vous allez voir que dans le rapport, on a vraiment trois thèmes clés qui ont émergé. Et puis, ces thèmes sont vraiment orientés à notre travail. Tout d'abord, nous voulons vraiment créer une expérience plus accueillante aux nouveaux arrivants. Comme vous le savez, c'est vraiment plus complexe que ça paraît. The immigration experience can begin before someone makes that really important life decision to relocate themselves and maybe members of their families to a new country, or it's faced with dire circumstances where they have to move quickly and an individual or family are forced to flee to their country to find themselves in a refugee situation. So we know that the beginning, that pre-arrival, is such an important part of settlement and support. And everyone who makes their way to a new life in Canada has a unique story, and sometimes that gets lost because we focus so much on process, on numbers, on operations. I have to say that when I joined the department, it actually struck me from the first initial briefings where we talked a lot about the service standards, the backlogs, and we forgot about people. And that actually had an impact on me. I actually asked the team to we have to change the way we talk. We have to change the way we focus. And I know that the operations of a department that has a footprint across the country and across the world, the operations matter. The productivity matters. But I think people have to be at the forefront of our work, and we can never forget that in what we do as we develop policies and programs. And I think that, our voice in Ottawa is actually more valuable when we have, stories that we hear from clients and from all of you in order to make the case for a policy change or a program addition. And so what does it mean for us in terms of how do we conduct our business? It does mean a culture shift within our organization. It does mean that we have to address some of these long-standing issues. And we know that the system is still very complex. Navigating our system is very challenging for clients. I've heard that front end as people try to either come as an economic immigrant or do a family reunification process. And it's not simple. And so we need to think about how do we do things while maintaining the integrity, the safety, the security of Canadians. But I think there are, there's a better balance that we can achieve. I think that, most of the early things I heard as I went around the country was around processing time for students, processing time for workers, and that was, a pretty constant complaint as we went around and talked to people, but also the frustration around the time gaps for privately sponsored refugees and families or communities that had come together to think about refugee resettlement, and the delays in the processing were having an impact on their ability to support vulnerable people. So I think we've done a lot of work to try to change our practices and get back to service standards that we had prior to COVID. But I think now we have to actually evaluate our service standards and actually determine whether or not we need to adjust them to be more competitive internationally. Les demandeurs nous disent également qu'ils composeraient mieux avec la réalité des délais de traitement si seulement ils pourraient être informés de façon plus constante et en temps réel de l'état d'avancement de leurs demandes. Il n'y a pas beaucoup d'interaction. Il n'y a pas une façon que nos clients peuvent aller vérifier, un peu voir où est leur application dans le système. One of the things I thought about when I arrived at the department is, I can track my package from the minute I put it in my cart in my online shopping, and I can see exactly where it is throughout the process. Yet, if I am a person who makes an application for immigration, I can not get real-time information for where I stand in the system. And I think we've got to improve that two-way information sharing. So it's really about a service standard. And while there are some IRCC changes that need to be put in place, I think we almost always have to remind ourselves that it's not just about the immigration interaction with our department. It really is about a whole of society lift, and I truly believe that. It takes government, it takes NGOs, it takes academic institutions, it takes private sector, it takes local communities in order to really welcome people. And one comment that always will stay with me. I was meeting in a rural part of New Brunswick with some stakeholders in immigration in that northern New Brunswick community, and a business owner who had welcomed a lot of newcomers into his business, both refugees and economic immigrants, had said to me, I learned very quickly that my community is extremely friendly, but we're not welcoming. And these are two different things. And Canada prides itself on being friendly, but we actually have to pride ourselves on investing in the time it takes to really welcome people. And it does take a whole of society lift. And that means deeper collaboration, all levels of government, and that's something we heard quite clearly, is that interaction between provincial, territorial, and the federal government, and alignment with respect to immigration, and also the organizations that support newcomers. And it also means that we need to listen and learn from the experience of those who have lived the immigration experience themselves. And so I take a lot of value in that, direct connection with people who interact with our system, and I learn from it. And that's why we're creating a Council of Newcomers. It's an advisory body to myself as deputy to provide feedback on client service experience, on what their lived experience look like, and how we can improve the way we think about future policies and programs to continue that ongoing dialogue. And I know that many look to include newcomers, local immigration partnerships councils, on their councils for this very reasons, right? LIPs are doing some great work in communities across the country, grounded in this approach of collaboration and working across different sectors, which is key. Another theme that surfaced during our review, in which you'll find in our report, is the need to develop a comprehensive and coordinated growth plan for immigration. It comes back again to our need to strengthen that kind of whole of government, whole of society approach. One way we at IRCC are increasing our efforts in this regard is we're actively exploring how to better coordinate even across federal departments. One of the things that struck me is every year when Immigration Canada tables our levels plan in Parliament, it is signed off by one other minister, the Border Services Minister. But the reality is, if we are thinking about a growth plan for the country, if we are thinking about the immigration levels for the country, we actually need to be involving our infrastructure colleagues, our health colleagues, our labor market colleagues in a much more deliberate way so that people see that there is a plan and that there is there's reflection around our capacity to absorb, our capacity to organize ourselves to welcome people. And so I think that there has been a lot of conversation that is worrisome around immigration in this country. The lack of available housing, the stress on the healthcare system. And we firmly believe that immigration is actually the solution to these challenges. We've been able to modify our system to actually go and recruit construction workers through our express entry system. We did a draw very recently to draw carpenters and machine operators and welders to be part of that main d'oeuvre that we need in order to build homes in this country. So I think we really have to kind of work across government departments. That's just at the federal level. And then in addition to that, work a little bit more seamlessly with our provincial and territorial governments. Alors, comme la plupart d'entre vous le savent, le ministre vient d'annoncer le plan des niveaux d'immigration pour 2024, 2025 et 2026. Les objectifs d'accueillir 485 000 nouveaux résidents permanents en 2024 et 500 000 en 2025 et 2026, qui va vraiment stabiliser à 500 000. Ça va permettre une croissance démographique durable. The details of the levels plans are of interest to many groups, but especially to those who work in the settlement sector and municipalities. We have heard very clearly that there's an appetite for as much information as possible regarding federal government planning, as it helps planning at the local level. And when we did our immigration review, we looked at, other countries, New Zealand, how they have designated welcoming communities that can have the capacity to grow. What is the measurement of that? What is the criteria? How do we think about regional immigration to alleviate the pressures on our big cities across the country? I think that there has to be better connections between ourselves and partners. Another good example is around asylum seekers. A lot of my time has been focused on the very real context that we're living right now, where last year we saw 92,000 people claim asylum in Canada. We are tracking well beyond 110,000 people this year. And so how do we work as a federal government, not just with provincial government, municipal governments, businesses who are looking for labor, individuals who may seek supports from communities, who may seek job fairs, who may need relocation assistance. And I think these types of major challenges are only solved when you work together. I'm a team sport person, so I always say public service is a team sport, and I think that immigration and welcoming people has to be a team sport involving all partners. So in future levels planning, we intend to take a broader view, looking at all newcomers arriving in Canada and considering the impact of both permanent and temporary residents have on this country. I often find that when we have a conversation about 500,000 people by 2025, it's actually an artificial debate. 30% of those people probably are already in Canada. The pressures that we feel are around the temporary resident arrivals, whether international students, whether asylum seekers, whether people who are here visiting our country. And so we need to think about holistically, not just what is the PR plan for the country, but what is our immigration plan for the country in all aspects of immigration. I have heard as well that there's an interest in enhanced communications on refugee flows and to address the challenges with the higher volume of asylum seekers. We had a recent meeting of provincial, territorial, and federal ministers of immigration to talk about how do we have better planning with respect to refugee resettlement. And we heard from our colleagues around the country about better predictability on arrivals and how we can information share on the individuals who are arriving in their province. So again, better communication seems to be a bit of a theme throughout the report.
Since we want to leave some time for questions and discussion, I would like to underline some other measures in our report. We launched our call for proposal for settlement, which will help us to reinforce and find initiatives to reinforce local partnership and also enhance services in rural and small communities. And we will also want to widen the services offered to Francophone communities and Francophone immigrants outside Quebec. I think the minister has talked about the objectives 6, 7, and 8% as far as Francophone immigration. We've also looked at the success of the pilot project in rural and northern communities. We would like this to be a permanent program, and we will see how we can enhance the scope of this program and in looking specifically at the Francophone communities.
Plan to support the third theme from the Strategic Immigration Review, which is very much to better align the immigration system with the labor market. But I think we need to expand the conversation when it comes to economic immigration in this country. As we look at our programs within IRCC, we tend to be very siloed. You either come as an economic immigrant, as a refugee, as a student, as a family reunification, but the reality is people can be multiple things. You can be a refugee that, can contribute to an economic need in the country. And so I think we've got to think about labor pathways in a different way. We've got to look at our programming to look at the contribution that people can make. And I think that will be a big part of our work going forward. And this includes tackling the ongoing challenge of foreign credential recognition, working very closely with provinces and territories. So the challenges are real. When you look at refugee resettlement, when you look at the situation in the Middle East right now, when you look at the context of asylum seekers and the pressures that we're feeling as a country and frankly around the world, when you look at the pressures of international students, balancing labor market needs and vulnerable workers, these are very real challenges that the department is facing. And I would say what is worrisome is this, we have enjoyed as a country across party lines, across federal, provincial, territorial, municipal jurisdiction, a support for immigration. And I think that support is still there. But I do think that we have to pay attention to that social cohesion element to immigration, and we have a role to play there. But there is enormous opportunity. I was telling Vicki at our table that, when I travel within Canada, I hear a lot of criticisms about the system. But when I leave Canada and go abroad, I should probably do that more often because it's good for the ego. But you hear about Canada's successes. You hear about a 40-year tradition, an ecosystem of settlement organizations that have done amazing work. You are pointed to in terms of best practices for integration. I think Australia did a review of their immigration program, and they referenced Canada 42 times in their review. There is a lot of good happening here, but I don't think we can be complacent. I don't think we can just kind of let the world catch up to what we're doing. I think we need to continue to innovate and be better at what we do. And I think that as a country, we need to do it as a community of people who care a lot about immigration and are very thoughtful about that. We have to have conversations like this to discuss how we can do better. And I think we have to do that in the context of, the work that we're undertaking in the department around diversity and inclusion, around tackling hard issues, around differential outcomes in immigration decisions, and around how the country can organize itself to do this well and to communicate to others that Canada needs immigration. We are enriched by it, but we need to make sure we work together to put together a comprehensive plan. So I'll close by saying that I do firmly believe that we have to collaborate to have success. I think that you have heard me say this throughout my presentation. It is a bit of a theme. And I think I can be candid with you that the report that we put out does not have all the answers. It doesn't solve all the problems, but it does commit to certain actions to move forward. And I think that we want to continue to hear from you and make changes where we think are important changes to reflect the needs of this sector. Alors, merci beaucoup de m'avoir accueilli. Puis, on peut maintenant...
Thank you for welcoming me, and we can now start the Q&A period.
So we'll be using Slido to field the questions, and so please submit your questions. Please vote on others' questions, and there are lots of questions already up there. So we'll just give a minute for voting, and then we'll get started. Okay, we'll start with the first question, which is, how are you addressing the wage gap between federal government employees and settlement sector employees, who are essentially being paid to do the job of the federal government?
Fair question. I'll share a personal reflection on this. So I have a younger brother who's a personal support worker. And, at some point he had to make a decision around, stopping the work that he actually loved to support people because he couldn't support himself. But going to a private sector corporation to answer a phone, he was making more money than taking care of the most vulnerable people in our society. And so I do find that discouraging and hard. And so I will say that from a personal standpoint. I think from a federal government standpoint, I think that, we have to look at the investments that we make into the settlement sector. I think last year we were close to $1.3 billion across the country. So I think we need to work with the sector to better understand the needs, better understand the staffing requirements to do the work that we are asking you to do through contribution agreements, and then what is the right level of staff and what is the right level of funding that needs to be allocated to those staff dollars. And so I think I don't have the answer to this question today in the context of every organization that is represented in this room. But I think that the call for proposal is an opportunity to look at the sector, to look at the contributions that we make to individual organization, to look at perhaps maximizing the spend in terms of greater collaboration, reducing duplication, so that the funding is going to the right things at the right moment. So I think that's my best answer now, but I recognize the challenge that you face as a sector, absolutely.
Great. Next question. What levers does the federal government have? Oh, we had this question yesterday, I think, too. Okay, what levers does the federal government have to encourage provincial governments to change the lengthy process of getting foreign credentials recognized?
I do think we have levers, and I think that, I did many years of intergovernmental affairs, and you always have the debate between kind of carrot and stick, and I think that in the negotiations with provinces, I think one huge lever that we have is fiscal transfers and funding transfers, and I think that we've had a lot of conversations around foreign credential recognition at the intergovernmental tables that I sit at, and I would make a few reflections. I think that one, although people may have different views about sort of the COVID response as a country, I do find that the provincial, territorials, and federal government came together in a way that showed urgency and immediacy to try to solve key problems around COVID. And I think we need to bring that same level of urgency and immediacy to some of the challenge we're facing now. And I would say the three top ones for me would be housing, it would be FCR, foreign credential recognition, and the opioid crisis. That same level of urgency probably needs to be applied. So how can we do that? I think that accrediting bodies have a big role to play here, and I think provincial and territorial governments have an ability to manage, their legislative agendas in order to try to break that down. And we see that it's not just foreign credential recognition. There's labor mobility issues that we see across the country. I was at Indigenous Services Canada in the pandemic, and at one point I had a major outbreak in a northern Manitoba community, and I could not move my northern Ontario nurses to northern Manitoba because they were not recognized to practice even though they were doing the exact same job. So these types of challenges are real for the country and we need to tackle them. But I think at immigration we do have, and we've had some good conversations, and one quite recently with provinces and territories around, we can be more facilitative, perhaps, and give more, more leeway on provincial nominee programs, maybe more access to healthcare draws from permanent residency plans that provinces and territories have them. But I think we should only do that if they can demonstrate that these people can practice upon arrival. And that way we could be more facilitative, and we could do that with a number of our priorities, whether it be around FCR, whether it's around Francophone immigration. Hey, you want to increase your PNP allocation? Wonderful. Here are our objectives nationally. How can you help us achieve those objectives? So I think there's, the labor market ministers have met, and I think there's a level of seriousness that I haven't seen around FCR that I'm seeing now at the labor minister's table, the immigration minister's table, and I think that we've got to incentivize that behavior as much as we can and not be part of the problem through any type of federal obstacle. And then I think we need to do a bit of a better job of communicating pre-arrival services and saying, okay, here's kind of what the recognition looks like or the credentialing looks like in Canada, and then work with colleges and universities to do upskilling or micro-credentialing upon arrival. But I think that work needs to start before the person finds themselves here. I think we need to start that pre-arrival support. So those are a few reflections on FCR.
You mentioned IRCC will be creating a newcomer advisory. Can you say more about its role, structure, and recruitment process, and how will their input be implemented, and how will they be compensated?
Yeah, so I can answer some of that, and some of it is still being worked through. But I think the idea really came, during the consultation. We met with a number of people. And I think one of the things that I thought was interesting in our consultation is we tried to get people around the table that may not have been around the table in the past. And I heard from many people who said, this is the first time I've ever participated in something like this. And because we picked individuals who had potentially, when I joined this department, I have to admit, like all of my emails, my phones, my social media accounts were flooded with people who needed help. Someone who adopted a child in Morocco and couldn't get back to Canada, someone who was stuck in Pakistan, someone who has been waiting for their PR for 6 months and had no idea what was going on. And I reached back out to many of those people, maybe not all of them, but many of them. And in learning from their experiences, I would go back to the department and say, okay, well, how come this happened? And can we explain this? And so that's where the idea started, but actually a young student, international student who was studying in Nova Scotia actually raised the idea at one of our roundtables to say, this is great, this one-time discussion, but you need to surround yourself with a council of newcomers, which I fully agreed with. And so how will it be done? I think at one stage we'd like to do a bit of a call out for interested people to be able to submit their interest in being part of it. There will be compensation, and we're working that through right now. But I think for the front end of this, to get it off the ground, the first members are probably going to be people who we met through this process to get the ball rolling and get them engaged. So that mother who reached out to me with her adoption case is probably going to be a part of it, and that student in Nova Scotia we're hoping is going to be a part of it. So we'll start that way and then have them kind of work through what is the process going forward. But I do want to absolutely compensate them for their time and for their advice that they will be providing me. So that's a little bit of where we're at, but if you have views on best practices, because I'm sure many of you have councils of newcomers, it would be very interesting for us to learn from you in this endeavor.
Great. The immigration report mentioned making rural northern immigration pilot a permanent program. The current pilot intake is set to close in the spring. Is there a time frame for when the permanent could launch?
Yeah. I think, I think the spring intake, and then I think the actual program ends in, I think, the end of August 2024. So obviously, we want to, in the new year, come out with a bit of the parameters of the program, how it will operate. I think this has actually yielded amazing results for regional immigration, to look at how businesses, how even universities and colleges, smaller municipal governments can work directly with IRCC. So I think you can expect details in the new year, but there's no time frame set at this moment.
Okay. Our valued colleague, Deepika Gupta, where are you, Deepika? Don't want to embarrass you, but she is here, I know, is taking her citizenship oath today, I believe at lunchtime. And would you please, everyone, offer her our congratulations. Where is she?
So congratulations, that is amazing. And actually, that's probably the best part of my job, is participating in citizenship ceremonies across the country, because you're reminded of the pride, you're reminded of the importance of that moment. And I think as a department, during COVID, we had to do things slightly differently, and we had to look at, digital and online ceremonies, and I think that there's still a place for that in where we're going in 2023. However, we can't lose sight of the importance of in-person ceremonies and offering someone perhaps the ability to do online if they wish for convenience and job requirements, but also the opportunity to come in person and celebrate with their loved ones. And so we're really going to do our best to strike that balance, and even maybe just to share, the clerk of the Privy Council has asked me to be a part of a task force of deputy ministers looking at values and ethics in the public service and looking at the gaps that exist for us. And one of the things that I have noticed is we have stopped having conversations with our staff around values and ethics. And each of us have a responsibility as deputy heads to look at the mandate of the organization and have these discussions with our staff. And the way we've made changes at IRCC is every time we onboard a group of staff members, so within, let's say, a 3-month period, we're going to kind of talk to them about the mandate of the department, the responsibilities they hold as public servants, the work that they will do. But as part of that orientation, we will have a citizenship ceremony for them to kind of live and experience the beauty of that. And so that's kind of, we have to do more of it, and we have to bring it to communities. Like we did a citizenship ceremony at the University Basketball Championships in Nova Scotia last March. And it was at halftime, and they sang the national anthem with 9,000 people watching the game. And the amount of people that came up to me after to say, "I've never taken part in something so beautiful. I'm so glad you did this." We need to kind of do this in more communities and more places around the country.